Consider the lilies, how they grow. They toil not, they spin not. And yet I say unto you that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. If then God so clothe the grass, which is today in the field and tomorrow is cast into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O ye of little faith? And seek not ye what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink, neither be ye of doubtful mind. For all these things do the nations of the world seek after, and your Father knoweth that ye have need of these things. But rather seek ye the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell that ye have, and give alms. Provide yourselves bags which wax not old, a treasure in the heavens that faileth not, where no thief approacheth, neither moth corrupteth. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem, Kakwadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples to us younger brothers. And peace and blessing and salutation to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah. Pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful lake, the believers, the listeners who have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Shah. All right. And what I want to get into today, we're dealing with he had power, all right, to take peace from the earth. Okay. And I want to start off with their precept in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verse 4. And then he is speaking of Esau, Edom. All right. And what we've come to realize, all right, is that the earth is ruled by the wicked, all right, the devil that the Bible speaks of, okay, which is Esau, Edom, all right, and the way that this man rules the earth is in complete wickedness. He rules it through violence, deception, okay, robbery, okay, confusion, you see, and for the longest, this man was looked at as the hero of the earth, okay. But as the Lord, has had, the truth, to shine bright in these latter days, okay, there's a bright light on his wickedness, okay? And one thing is we, follow this devil, we begin to pick up, on his schemes, his tactics, all right? And what he does in one place, he does throughout the earth, okay? You see, his format doesn't change. Now, the target might change, but the format really don't change. And I got a few videos, to go into it, because what we're seeing happening, with these wars and these conflicts, all right, this devil, he does this, he has done this throughout, the decades, ever since the small hats have got into their land of Israel, they've been demonizing, these different leaders, okay, that are not, pro-West, okay, they are not with the agenda. They're not fully with the agenda, okay, of, the Western powers, the small hats, America, Europe, okay, because we have to understand, these devils have colonized, the earth, okay, all these governments of the earth, okay, some more than others, are subjugated, to the powers that be, this beast system. Okay, and you have certain leaders that will buck up, okay, or revolt or rebel, against the authoritism, okay, of the West. All right, and it will all end, okay, in the same way. All right, and we're going to get those things now. Let's get this. Um, okay, in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verse 4, it says, "And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him, okay, a great sword." Okay, so this man's rulership, okay, will be predicated on this man taking peace from the earth. Okay, this is part of how this man rules, is that he seeks out peace and takes it away. Okay, if you're living peaceful, if you're a nation that's living peaceful, okay, you're a target to this devil. Okay, because he doesn't want peace, he wants uproars and confusion. That way he can come in and play the hero, okay, and control, okay, the aftermath. Okay, so this devil is known, one of his main characteristics is taking peace from the earth. Okay, and America is the last place that's finding out, all right, that the so-called white man is all about removing peace, okay, from the earth. You see, these other nations know, because they've had to deal with this man with the gloves off for decades. You know, he's been politically correct in America, okay, while deceptively, taking peace from, American society, okay. But now, all right, America is going to be the last one to experience, okay, these Edomites and how they really get down, okay, when the gloves come off. Okay, now I got a few videos because what we have to understand. Let's go here. Okay, now this is a YouTube short, and we got a couple more videos going to go into it. But what these devils are known for doing, is demonizing, these different leaders over there, in Africa and the Middle East, because it's full of resources. Their land, their area is full of resources, and it's, strategically located, between, the East and the West. Okay, when it goes to, the world map, you know. So what this devil does, because they want control, over those resources. Okay, they want control, over those lands and those areas. Okay, what this devil does, he demonizes, the leadership. If the leadership is not a puppet, okay, until the Zionists or and or the American regime, okay, the American imperialism, okay, they find some way to demonize their leader and come and do an overthrow. Okay, now one of the most well known, all right, leaders from their region of the earth, North Africa and the Middle East was Muammar Gaddafi. Okay, and there's a lot of mixed stories about him, and these leaders, we're going to get into a few of them. Okay, but of course, they're not perfect guys, and not saying that they didn't do no wrong within their leadership, their rulership. Okay, but they nowhere near the monsters that the West painted them out to be. Okay, I'm not saying that these guys are just innocent men. Okay, well, these men are nowhere near the monsters that the West painted them to be, that justified them, taking these men out and coming in, okay, and confiscating, okay, the resources, the wealth, okay, changing the government, setting up puppet leaders, destroying the quality of life, amongst the common people, okay. So let's play this, and then we'll get I got about two more videos I want to get into.
They said it was about freedom and democracy, but here's what they didn't tell you. Under Gaddafi, Libya had no electricity bills. Power was free for all. Loans came with zero interest, and banks were owned by the people. Newlyweds were gifted $60,000 to start a life. Education and medical treatment were completely free, and literacy rose from 25% to over 80%. If you wanted to farm, the government gave you land, seeds, livestock, even a house, all at no cost. Couldn't get treatment in Libya? The government paid over $2,000 and covered travel abroad. Gasoline cost just 14 cents per liter. Buy a car? The government paid half. Unemployed after graduation? The state paid your average salary until you found a job. Oil profits were deposited directly into citizens' bank accounts. Mothers who gave birth received $5,000. Bread? 40 loaves cost only 15 cents. And Libya had zero debt with $150 billion in reserves, now frozen globally. Gaddafi also built the world's largest irrigation project to bring water to the desert. A self-reliant Africa was rising, and that is why he had to go. They said it was about freedom and democracy.
So you never hear, this side of it on Western media, and one thing, with Western media, it keeps you extremely blind to reality. Western media have you stuck, okay, in delusion. All right, you'll be misinformed, okay, when it comes to everything. That's why, the Lord has allowed, different, sources of news, okay, to be available, because you'll never hear this side, okay, of the story with Western media, okay. So when you go into this guy's life, just to go into it, I found another documentary, okay, and like I say, of course, as a leader, you gotta make hard decisions, and over there they judge harshly, okay. And Esau will take a snippet, okay, of men, who's trying to do a coup, they get executed, all right. And Esau will make it seem like this is just what this man, these are what these men do for breakfast. They just wake up and do beheadings, and you see. But they'll tell you how, no electricity bill, zero loan, 0% interest on loans, so forth and so on. Okay. Married couples, get 60,000. You have a child, it's 5,000. They don't tell you that part. Okay, because another thing that makes America look extremely bad, to boast itself to be the number one country in the world, but the quality of living, okay, is terrible compared, to other nations. And then you think of Libya, you go to the average person in America and they think of Libya, they just think, of desert, camels, just like it's undeveloped. Okay. They don't look at, flourishing life. Okay. And that's another thing Western media does too. It paints the picture that everything outside America is just, the prehistoric. When you get outside of America, everything else is just prehistoric. Okay. And that's the way America, Western media is keeping up this narrative is if, you got the best in the West. And it's a goddamn lie. Okay. So now let's go here. And it's going to go into, all right, Gaddafi life. Like I say, the picture that they paint and you see, his life story, then it's like, okay, something ain't adding up. All right. But it goes back, to the Esau, giving the power to take peace from the earth. Okay. And if you don't bow to this system, which we'll get that in Revelation 13:2.
Colonel Muammar Gaddafi is known in popular memory as the long-time dictator of Libya, who was deposed and taken out in 2012. His legacy is marred by both brutality and advancement. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi may have the appearance of a stereotypical dictator, but the truth about him is undoubtedly much more nuanced. Gaddafi ruled over Libya for more than 4 decades, and despite being demonized in the Western media, he has always been a figure that people in his native country have both loved and hated. His biography, character, reign, and manner of death reveal a great deal about him and the types of adversaries he chose. The early life of Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Muhammad Abu Minir al-Gaddafi was born in a tent in the deserts of Tripolitania in western Libya. Muammar Gaddafi was born into a nomadic Bedouin family of Arab descent. He was the youngest of 4 children and the lone son of Aisha bin Niran and Muhammad Abdul Salam bin Hamid bin Muhammad. They were poor and had to herd goats and camels for a living. We do not know the exact date of his birth because the Bedouins did not keep records. The negative effects of colonialism on his early life and family history played a significant role in forming his worldview. His paternal grandfather was taken out in the 1911 Italian invasion before he was even born. Libya, an Italian colony when he was born, saw a number of significant battles during the Second World War's desert campaigns. After the war, Libya was occupied by French and British forces. Libya gained its independence in 1951 as the United Kingdom of Libya under the autocratic rule of King Idris, a pro-Western monarch. Gaddafi's family struggled financially and education was.
As you can see, when it says they're a pro-Western monarch, it means they were set up by Western powers, all right, the British and the French. This guy, King Idris, okay? And what they would do, they would push pro-Western, thought, philosophy, education, capitalism, okay? And the people will catch hell on it because it was all about, all right, draining resources and just turning. See, Esau colonized the earth to be slave colony. See, America was just a big slave colony. Just the slavery that we see in America, all right, that was just the biggest, okay, all right, form of a slave colony that these devils would do all throughout the earth. Okay. You see emphasis on America because of who we were, the Israelites. Okay. And it was prophecy, okay, spoken of, you see. But this is how these devils get down throughout the earth. They colonize, these different lands and turn them into slave colonies and extrapolate the resources for the wealth, okay, of these Edomite, all right, governments, man. The British, the French, the Spanish, okay, the Portuguese, okay, and now America, all right.
Not free. Nevertheless, Muammar was sent to school. He was a diligent young man who understood the financial hardship attending school caused his family. He worked hard, moving up 6 grades in just 4 years. During the evenings, he would sleep on the floor of a mosque, and on the weekends, he would walk 20 miles to visit his grandparents. Gaddafi was enrolled in a secondary school after excelling in primary school, a privilege neither of his parents had. His family relocated to south central Libya, where his father served as a tribal chief's caretaker. Gaddafi encountered a variety of ideologies at school, where many of his instructors were Egyptian. He was a great admirer of Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser and shared many of his ideologies and political views. After completing his education, Gaddafi developed strong political opinions and backed socialist and nationalist Arab ideologies. He disapproved of Zionism, colonialism, and neo-colonialism, as well as Western imperialism. In October 1961, Gaddafi started participating in politics and organized a protest against Syria's decision to leave the United Arab Republic. Muammar Gaddafi enlisted in the military and enrolled at the Royal Military Academy in 1963. He was extremely dissatisfied with the British influence, and while serving in the military, he began to form the Central Committee of the Free Officers Movement, a revolutionary organization. He was given a special assignment in England in 1966. He also learned English during this time. His experience made him appreciate the value of his own country's culture, and he later claimed that he disliked England.
When lives depend on physical strength and mental sharpness, blood flow matters. That's why firefighters rely on Vinia.
Gaddafi seizes power in 1969.
And real quick, as you see, he rejected, he didn't like Zionism, and he didn't like the colonization of those European countries. Now, the Egyptian president, who he looked up to, said this quote, that brothers used to pull often. Okay. Now this is the Egyptian president that Muammar Gaddafi looked up to. Now it says Gamal Abdel Nasser, his son, all right, was an Egyptian military officer and revolutionary who served as the second president of Egyptian from 1954 until the death in 1970. It says, it's a quote that he said. Yeah, here you go. It says in 1958, President Nasser of Egypt said of the Jews, they left here black and came back white. Okay, so he said they left here black and came back white because the small hats was established, okay, in 1948 in what they call the state of Israel today. Those Edomites, those small hats. And this Egyptian president said, wait a minute, they left here black and came back white. Okay. And he was saying those are not the people. Okay. So when you and he said there'll never be peace over there. He said that's one of the reasons there'll never be peace, because they're not the people. But this is the president of Egypt who Muammar Gaddafi, looked up to. Okay. Just to go into that. But we can go back to the video. All right. So you see, he rejected, he was anti-West, he had views. Okay. There was that wasn't pro-West at a young age. So let's play this.
In Libya, King Idris' rule had fallen out of favor significantly during the 1960s. Arab nationalism was on the rise, and corruption had undermined his authority. Riots broke out in Tripoli and Benghazi after Libyans began to protest the government's support of the West. Following Egypt's defeat in the Six-Day War, many Libyans felt sympathy for Egypt, and Egypt-related protests spread widely. The CIA anticipated a coup attempt because there were numerous revolutionary groups in the military. However, they did not anticipate it to originate with Muammar Gaddafi's Free Officers movement. While the king was away, Gaddafi began to carry out his plan to seize control of important facilities like airports, police stations, and government buildings. They faced little opposition during the 1 September Revolution, as it was later called. Crown Prince Sayyid Hassan Rida al-Mahdi, as Senussi was detained and made to give up power. Gaddafi declared the Libyan Arab Republic in its place and emphasized freedom, socialism, and unity. The next few years saw Gaddafi consolidate his power. The Central Committee of the Free Officers movement became the Revolutionary Command Council, which began purging the government of monarchists. His early rule was fraught with danger, and he survived 2 coup attempts in 1970. Reforms. Libya needed a sizable boost in several sectors if it was to turn into a respectable economy. His new government launched a green revolution to transform the agricultural sector. Farms were built and irrigation systems were installed along the Libyan coast. However, Gaddafi's focus on the oil sector completely changed the nation's economy. 51% of the operations of all foreign oil producers in the nation were nationalized. Libya's per capita income surpassed that of industrialized nations like Italy and the UK in 1979. The revenue from this business was used to fund social welfare initiatives like improving healthcare, education, and housing. Malaria was eradicated. Adult literacy initiatives and free university education were put into place, along with mandatory education. Muammar Gaddafi quickly won the hearts of the Libyan people thanks to these programs, which were wildly successful. The Popular Revolution. Gaddafi began the Popular Revolution on April 16, 1973, with goals resembling those of the Cultural Revolution in China. He developed the Third International Theory as the foundation for the Popular Revolution. He proposed an Islamic superstate made up of third world nations to lead Islam against the imperialist pursuits of its enemies and rejected both the United States and the Soviet Union as imperialists. He nevertheless kept much closer ties with the Soviet Union than with the United States. Gaddafi outlined the principles and laws that would govern Libya and the Libyan people in his.
And it said he kept closer ties, with the Russians than with the United States, which that's prophecy as well. When you go to Ezekiel 38, okay, let's get it real quick. Post it. So you get that in Ezekiel 38 and verse. Yeah, verse 5. All right. Show you the scriptures is undefeated. But just real quick, when they talk about the different allies of Russia, okay, Ezekiel 38 and 5, it says Persia. Okay, it says Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Okay, because he didn't want these governments to come in, all right, and he didn't want to sell out Libya to these big governments, whether it was America or Russia, but he did keep close ties with Russia. You said seeing him and Putin having meetings. Okay, so he leaned more towards Russia as an ally, okay, than America, because he hated the West. Okay, and this is why he was demonized so much. Okay, like I said, not saying that he was a saint or that he was a perfect man. All right, but he's came from humble beginnings. He gave free school to people. When he had to come up, he had to pay for school. So uh, the way that they demonize him is far from the character that the man was, and this is what the West is known for. Okay, so let's play this some more.
His Green Book, which was composed of 3 compact volumes. But not everyone was content. Many of his RCC allies were unhappy with the increase in foreign aid spending. In 1974, a few people, including Umar Muheshi, one of his RCC co-workers, started preparing for a coup against Gaddafi. When their scheme was discovered in 1975, Muheshi fled, while many of his fellow conspirators were apprehended and put to death. After that, anti-revolutionary elements were removed from the military. Protests also erupted as anti-Gaddafist students clashed with police and pro-Gaddafist students, while privately owned Islamic colleges and universities were shut down in an attempt to control religion in the country and eradicate conservative anti-Gaddafist clerics from office. Gaddafi lost his friendship with Egypt during this period of complicated international relations, but he did make new allies in Pakistan, Zaire, and Uganda under Idi Amin. Israel downed Libyan Arab Airlines Flight 114 in 1973 after it erred and flew into its airspace during a sandstorm. Gaddafi accused Egypt of failing to do enough to stop the catastrophe. He also criticized Egypt for leaving Libya out of the preparations for the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Gaddafi abolished the Libyan Arab Republic in 1977 and replaced it with the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, which was formerly a direct democracy. Despite the government's best efforts to provide all Libyans with amenities, particularly housing, many civil liberties were taken away, and the media came directly under the revolution's control. Gaddafi was the target of plots by opponents of the state and the revolution both inside and outside of Libya.
And when you hear about these revolutionary rebellions, okay, and these coups, it's all backed by CIA, okay, to cause, insurrection from within. And this is a common theme. And when we go to this other video, you're going to see that common theme, all right, that they use against, these leaders, to put pressure on the people through sanctions, okay, And then they began to sabotage, the leader. His poor leadership, is having poor leadership. And then, there's there's a whole movement, okay, against a leader that has the people's interests in mind, okay? And that's the manipulation of the West, and foreign governments, okay? And it's no different than what we're seeing in Iran today. Okay, Iran is just the latest target. All right, but this is what they do. This is all the West does. Okay, is manipulate and tamper. Okay, and scheme within other governments, man. For their own gain. Money, control, resources. Okay, um,
Gaddafi took extreme measures, employing hit squads to take out numerous dissidents who were residing in Europe. Growing conflict he had with the West. Libya had experienced an economic downturn in the early 1980s as a result of the drop in the price of oil and the resulting reduction in revenue. Gaddafi found it difficult to maintain his security following several unsuccessful military operations and the new Reagan administration's hardline stance, which openly incited demonstrations in Libya. The US held military exercises in the Gulf of Sirte on the border of Libyan territory and ended up shooting down 2 Libyan jets. Following that, the US leveled numerous accusations of involvement in destruction and even an attempted takedown of Ronald Reagan. All of these accusations were never backed up by solid evidence. The US military conducted military drills in the Gulf of Sirte, once more sinking 2 Libyan vessels this time. After accusing Gaddafi of being responsible for the 1986 destruction of a disco in Berlin, the US decided to attack Libya with airstrikes, which resulted in the termination of over 100.
so over accusation, okay, that he destructed a disco in Berlin, they did airstrikes. Listen to what's being said. A goddamn disco in Berlin, all right, made Libya and Gaddafi a target for airstrikes, man. Let's listen to this, man.
After accusing Gaddafi of being responsible for the 1986 destruction of a disco in Berlin, the US decided to attack Libya with airstrikes, which resulted in the termination of over 100 people, including Gaddafi's adopted daughter. Gaddafi was charged with carrying out the Lockerbie destruction in 1988, which resulted in the destruction of a passenger airliner and the deaths of 270 people. Sanctions from the international community followed, and despite pursuing a pan-Arab mission to unite many Arab countries, Libya found itself increasingly isolated. The nation was engulfed in uprisings and riots, and Gaddafi also felt increasingly threatened in his own nation. In spite of international outrage, the UN lifted many sanctions against Libya after Gaddafi allegedly handed over the alleged perpetrators in the late 1990s. Muammar Gaddafi's last years. Gaddafi tried to strengthen his ties with Europe in the 2000s by taking a more diplomatic stance. He also supported creating a military alliance between African nations to compete with NATO and the idea of a united Africa. Gaddafi implemented economic reforms in Libya that resulted in the privatization of numerous industries and the opening of trade with former adversaries. However, he persisted in his rhetorical attacks on the US. Revolts broke out in the nation in 2011, influenced by the Arab Spring, which saw the fall of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt and Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali in Tunisia. In response to these demonstrations, Gaddafi launched a crackdown that alienated many people within his own government. Revolts turned into rebellions and then into a full-scale civil unrest. Accusations of crimes saw sanctions again imposed on Libya, and NATO conducted an airstrike that took out Gaddafi's youngest son and 3 of his grandchildren. Rebel forces in Sirte took him out after NATO warplanes destroyed Muammar Gaddafi's convoy on October 20, 2011. His cadres and his body were thrown into the air as a spectacle. He was eventually laid to rest in an unmarked grave in the desert. Muammar Gaddafi was a complex figure whose support ebbed and flowed throughout his rule. He implemented successful policies, but his grip on power was realized by a dictatorship.
Hmm. So, you see, eventually the U.S. got involved, all right, and took him out, and they did a lot of demonization, in his character in the news, and America looked like a hero, and doing what they did. Okay, just like now, you got people celebrating, Trump, okay, dropping bombs, okay, on Iran. Okay, is it Iran is this major threat to America, man? Okay, which at the end of the day, the Western media knows how, to fabricate a villain, okay, and also fabricate a hero. You see, and the Western media have you all over the place, okay, believing the goddamn lie, okay, and they've been in this region, the Middle East, okay, and over here in Northern Africa, okay, and they just ran through their region and has this place that's in constant chaos and confusion, okay, to where you think everything from this region is a terrorist. When you look at, how they dress and, their customs, you associate it with terrorism now because of Western media. Okay, now you had this here. I'm play a little bit of this and then we'll get a couple of precepts. Once you play this here, let's see. So this is what did the different, rulers that was around during the time of Gaddafi, and they was all, pretty much destroyed by Western media and government. Okay. And some of these guys, they will try to play both sides and, and eventually they'd be taken out. Okay. And you had a few, that was about their people. Okay. And America doesn't like governments that, show a model of government that's better than their government. Okay. Because they have to keep, the narrative going that, you know, people in America got the best. Everyone else is oppressed under dictatorships and, the quality of life, and they can't do nothing, you know. Meanwhile, this devil is getting ready to set up a digital, system into where, your breath, every breath you take, will be monitored. Okay, damn hypocrite, man. So let's play a little bit of this.
These 6 friends ruled over their countries with an iron fist, enjoying untapped power, influence, and riches. What they didn't know was that over the next 10 years, all of them would be overthrown by their own people. So how did they rise to power, and how did they fall? Let's start with Zain al-Abidin bin Ali. Bin Ali's rise to power was swift. He was raised in a middle-class family in the Tunisian port city of Sousse, where he joined the resistance movement against French colonialists and later enlisted in the army, working his way up to become the country's chief of military intelligence.
And you're going to see the similarities where, they come from, middle, lower class families. They work their way up through the ranks. Okay. And they will, and they're, they're rooted in anti-colonism of the West, So Tunisia was dealing with the colonization, of the French. So it was mainly the French, the British, and the America, they have colonized most of Africa, and most of the Middle East. Okay.
In 1987, he was appointed prime minister by Tunisia's anti-colonial icon Habib Bourguiba, whose health and popularity was in steep decline. Just 1 month later, Ben Ali removed Bourguiba from power and declared himself Tunisia's president. As leader, Ben Ali enacted sweeping reforms, promising a new era for Tunisia after years of repression. But these didn't last long, and soon his party dominated parliament and he was running unopposed.
We're Phoenix Energy, a family-owned oil company focused on unleashing American oil from North Dakota and Montana.
Critics were jailed, and journalists pressured to stay in line. By 2010, Tunisia was one of the world's most repressive regimes. Meanwhile, punitive economic restrictions on the country's working class pushed many to the brink of desperation. On the 17th of December 2010, a young street vendor by the name of Mohammed Bouazizi set himself on fire outside a government house after his license was suspended, lighting a fuse that ignited a historic wave of protests across the country and the region. On the 14th of January 2011, Ben Ali conceded power and fled with his family to Saudi Arabia, where he evaded trial for corruption and the brutal crackdown on protesters until his death in 2019 from prostate cancer. He had led Tunisia for 23 years. Hosni Mubarak was also a military man, born to humble rural means. He rose to prominence as an Air Force pilot who became a war hero following the Yom Kippur War with Israel in 1973. 2 years later, he was appointed vice president by Anwar Sadat. In 1981, during a military parade commemorating the war, Sadat was assassinated by armed gunmen, and Mubarak suddenly found himself president. He promised Egyptians economic prosperity, but that never materialized. Instead, he and his family were accused of amassing billions in wealth with the help of real estate tycoons, while his security apparatus ran Egypt's daily affairs with impunity, turning the country into a police state. Following the brutal death of a young man named Khalid Said at the hands of police in 2010, a small anti-government swell began to grow against him. When Ben Ali was successfully overthrown in Tunisia, Egyptians were inspired to do the same. On the 25th of January 2011, protesters began occupying Cairo's Tahrir Square. "18 days later, after hundreds of protesters were gunned down and millions more filled the streets, Mubarak was forced to step down by the country's military. Mubarak, his sons, and associates were tried and sentenced to decades in prison for corruption, fraud, and the killing of protesters. However, as Egypt's military slowly regained power in the following years, many of those sentenced were overturned, and Mubarak died a peaceful death in 2020, a free man. He was president of Egypt for 30 years. Most people remember Muammar al-Gaddafi for his crazy antics and extravagant style, but Gaddafi was once a revolutionary icon. At just 27 years old, he overthrew Libya's unpopular King Idris I in 1969 with the help of a group of military officers called the Free Officers Movement. Gaddafi declared Libya a republic and nationalized the country's recently discovered oil reserves, lifting Libya's economy out of poverty and improving the standard of living for Libyans. In 1973, he declared a popular revolution to implement a new vision for Libya, his vision, under what he dubbed the Third Universal Theory, rejecting the US and Soviet Union as imperialist powers in favor of a pan-Arab, pan-Islamic socialism. Gaddafi published his philosophy in a series of volumes later known as the Green Book, implementing them in school curriculums and using them to base his country's political and legal system on. His anti-Western narrative soured his relationship with the US, which embargoed Libyan oil in 1982. That was followed by a series of sanctions by the UN, following accusations Gaddafi was behind a series of terror attacks. The sanctions crippled Libya's economy and encouraged Gaddafi to exert more control over the country, purging institutions from critics and cracking down on tribal leaders and opposition figures. When Libyans began to protest in 2011, Gaddafi responded defiantly, vowing to shut down and kill those he accused of undermining the country.
لكن أنا ما عنديش منصب، ما عنديش حاجة أستقيل منها، عندي بندقيتي، أنا هنقاتل لآخر قطرة من دمي، ومعي الشعب الليبي.
Thus began the start of the Libyan civil war, pushing many protesters to take up arms in the face of Gaddafi's military. Many officials and officers also defected and set up the National Transitional Council in the eastern provinces of the country. The UN Security Council also stepped in, imposing a no-fly zone to ground Gaddafi's air force and stop him bombing his own cities. On the 20th of October 2011, a NATO airstrike destroyed a military convoy carrying Gaddafi. He was detained by a local militia and was found dead a few hours later. He had ruled Libya for 42 years. Like Gaddafi, Yemen's Ali Abdullah Saleh was not going down without a fight. He had ruled over one of the region's poorest and most divided countries, starting out as a soldier fighting in the North Yemen Civil War in the 60s and 70s that overthrew the Saudi-backed monarch with the help of Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. Saleh eventually became North Yemen's president, and by 1990 was negotiating the unification of Yemen and a place for himself as its first leader. Over the following years, he would crush uprisings from his southern opponents, as well as from the Houthi rebels in the north. Yemen's economy never recovered from decades of war, but Saleh and his family amassed a private fortune of up to $60 billion. When an uprising began on the 27th of January 2011, Saleh quickly vowed not to seek re-election, but refused to step down as president, even after an assassination attempt in June left him physically scarred. He eventually ceded power to his deputy and disappeared from public light, but he still wasn't done. In 2014, he allied with his former enemies in the north, the Houthis, and helped them take over the capital Sana'a. A regional military coalition led by Saudi Arabia responded, backing Yemen's government. This ignited a devastating civil war, killing tens of thousands and plunging the country into the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
This is not a natural disaster. It is man-made.
In late 2017, the Houthis discovered Saleh was in talks with Saudi and the UAE to end the war and reinstate him as Yemen's leader. Branded a traitor, Saleh was killed while trying to flee an ambush by Houthi fighters on the 4th of December. He had ruled North Yemen for 12 years and Yemen for 22.
And there was a point on that one. And what I wanted to show, was that you see the same pattern. Now, some of them guys were, pro-Western leaders, okay, and it was an authentic uprising that got them out of there, all right? And what it shows you that America does the same, the West does the same thing. They demonize the leader. Well, they come in with the sanctions, which cripples the economy, which puts people in poverty. Poverty creates an uprising, and when there's an uprising, the West can come in and say he's a poor leader, and they can come in and do regime change. Because you see the latest with Iran, all right, is one of the main talking points, which they say they want to do a regime change. And Russia like, nah, that's not even on the table, a regime change in Iran, because they want to put pro-Western, leadership within Iran so they can come and have their way with those resources, because Russia and China depend heavily on those resources, which me and the brother Radza, we'll get into it. Me and the beloved brother Tazama, we'll get into it later on tonight, going into the history with Iran, how we got to this point where we at now, with America and Iran. Okay. But this is just how these devils get down. They're behind all these civil unrest because they arm, these different rebels, they insert, different narratives, within these different governments, okay, and they play the background like they're innocent, okay, and then they come in, with their military to save the day, all right, and set up the government they want and distribute the resources how they want, okay, and these devils do this all throughout the earth, and the scriptures describe these devils, man, When you go to Michael 2:1, it says, "What sorrow awaits you who lie awake at night, thinking up evil plans? You rise at dawn and hurry to go to carry them out, simply because you have the power to do so." Okay, so these devils, they're always in some council coming up with evil plans. Okay, on how to overthrow, how to disrupt this government. Okay. Especially if this government is, not kissing the ring, okay, of Western powers, okay, and if they're flourishing, all right, and if they're not in debt, to the bankers, Libya was, $150 billion up, they have no debt, okay, but now you look at Libya now, it's a nightmare, okay, because remember when Muammar Gaddafi was in power, there was no debt. All right. Let's see. Does Libya have debt now? Does Libya? Let me see. See, does Libya have debt? Yeah, so remember, let's go here real quick. When Omar Gaddafi was in power, okay, Libya was $150 billion up, no debt. All right, but now you look at today, just ask you, does Libya have debt? And it says yes, Libya has debt. While it has historically had low external debt due to its oil wealth, it faces significant internal debt, particularly to its own central bank. Libya's debt to GDP ratio is estimated to be 155%, with a total debt of around 70 billion, according to World Economics. This includes debt held by the government and other entities, and is a substantial figure relative to the country's GDP. So now Libya has debt. Okay, this is after Muammar Gaddafi. He was killed, over 10 years ago. All right, so how do you go from being $150 billion up to $70 billion in debt? Well, the central bank. Okay, when it says its own central bank, these are the elites central bank. Okay, it might be called the central bank of Libya, but it's the elite central bank. Okay, and they run the world off debt. So if you're not in debt, you're a threat to them, man. It's just a wicked rulership, man. Okay, it says when you want a piece of land back in Micah 2:10. Okay, it says when you want a piece of land, you find a way to seize it, and you see those videos. These devils go all out their way. Let's say civil unrest. Okay, the sanctions. Okay, the demonization of the leaders. Okay, the airstrike just to kill, the leader's granddaughter. Like, God damn. It says when you want someone's house, you take it by fraud and violence. Okay, you cheat a man on his property, stealing his family's inheritance, man. And this is what these devils have done. They've done it throughout the earth, man. Okay, there's the Gad, the northern tribes. Okay, this is what these devils do. Okay, they find a way, they find the means to get what they want. Okay, and it says, but this is what the Lord says: I will reward your evil with evil. You see, and this is why the judgment is prepared for these devils in this time, man. This is why the Lord is going to intervene in the earth and judge this devil, man, because this man hasn't been judged for all this wickedness, man. This man has done so much, wickedness in the earth, and is planning to do much more. Okay, but the Lord is going to reward this man's evil with evil. It says you won't be able to pull your neck out of the noose. You won't be able to escape the judgment. You will no longer walk around proudly, for it will be a terrible time, man. And that's why the scriptures speak about, Esau being brought, to the king of terrors. Okay, because right now Esau, he just been on the loose, running amok, terrorizing the earth. Where the scriptures say he's going to be brought, to the king of terrors. Okay, and he's going to be terrorized. All right, so that's the point. Just want to get into that. Some things I was watching. So Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters edified once again. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem, Kakadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers, and peace and blessing salutations to the whole elect. Shalom. Brother Norm, what you got going on? I ain't been up there since Monday. I know it was dry when I left Monday. I'm gonna be up there tomorrow. Yeah, I need that as soon as you can.
You still rolling?